The marble floor was cool beneath him, slick from spilled wine and the sweat of bodies that laughed too loudly. The air was thick with crushed myrrh, sweet and choking, clinging to the folds of his crimson robe like a memory that refused to loosen its grip. The robe was fine, dyed with blood-colored dye, lined with silken thread, but it was not his. Nothing in this place was. He sat as he always did, near the base of the low wall, close enough to serve, far enough to be ignored. His Kithra rested in his lap, strings silent, wood polished to a shine by fingers trained in obedience. The noblemen's voices rose and fell like waves on foreign shores, full of wit, drunken joy, idle cruelty. Their words did not reach him, not really. They circled above like flies around a feast. Outside, the cicadas sang, a chorus of summer life, as though the world beyond this chamber could not feel the weight of what lingered inside it. The oil lamp flickered, a sputtering flame unsure whether to stay or die. And in its wavering light, his face, still boyish, bore a practiced expression, not too joyful, not too distant, the perfect in-between. Just enough to be called Paidik, not a name, a role, a placeholder in a game he never chose. They called him the beloved, the gentle, the pleasing, but he was not beloved. He was kept, and the hands that guided him to the lyre, to the cup, to the lap of another, did so not with tenderness, but with possession. He was not whipped like a slave. No chains clinked around his ankles, yet he was owned. They never asked where he had come from. They never wanted to know. His homeland lay far beyond the hills, beyond the olive groves and the wine-dark sea. It lived now only in the curl of his accent, in the shadowed lullabies he dared not sing aloud. At night, when the laughter had faded into snores, and the wine soured on the lips of men too bloated to care, he would crouch near the hearth. In the ash left from the fire, he drew shapes. Letters. Words from his first tongue, now forbidden in this house of Attic pride. He traced them quietly, letting the soot cling to his fingertips like soot clings to memory. His mother's name, the name of the river that ran behind his childhood home. A prayer his grandmother once whispered during storms. They smudged quickly. But hey, they were real again. He did not cry. He had long since trained himself not to. But inside, a stillness grew, a cold knowing. He was not free. But he was not only a possession. He lived in the fragile space between two truths, between boy and man, body and soul, gold and grief. The philosophers debated freedom just outside, where he had once poured their craters and served their figs. They spoke of virtue, of temperance, of the soul's perfection. But none of them looked at him. None of them wondered what philosophy meant to someone who could not choose his own name. Still, there were nights, rare but real, when he slipped away, barefoot and silent, weaving through the alleys of the Acropolis like a ghost. The stone was warm beneath his feet, the city asleep above him, its grandeur resting in arrogance. He carried nothing with him but memory. Past the sleeping shrines, through the breath of the fig trees, he walked until he found the old wall. There, beneath a tree whose roots cracked the marble, he knelt and dug. Not deep, just enough. And into that hollow space, he placed the bronze ring. It was small, plain, but it was his. The last thing his father had pressed into his palm before handing him to the house of a magistrate, with words he could no longer bear to remember. He buried it gently, covered it with dirt, pressed the earth flat. And stood. The wind moved through the branches like a voice unspeaking. It brushed his cheek, soft and cold. He did not cry, not yet, but the wind knew. The wind always remembers. It carries what men choose to forget. The names, the bargains, the quiet suffering behind fine robes and empty cups. And it would carry his story too. Not tonight, not tomorrow. But one day, when a voice would rise in the ash and say what had been buried too long. He turned back toward the house on the hill, His bare feet left no sound on the stone. Only shadows followed, and far behind him, beneath the dew soil, the bronze ring waited, not as treasure, but as witness to a boy who was never truly seen. And to the silence that would one day, finally, speak. Morning broke not with fanfare, but with silence. Thin light spilled gently through the open lattice, slicing across the mosaic floor in quiet gold. The tiles, once vibrant with scenes of gods and myths, now seemed dulled by dust and repetition, as if even the stories etched in stone had grown tired of being watched. The scent of stale incense hung in the air, heavy and unmoving. Fig pulp had dried on the table near the wall, left from the night's feast, crusted and forgotten. There had been laughter long hollow, but it did not belong to him. He had risen before the others, before the house stirred, before the illusion of purpose returned. No command had called him from sleep. No footsteps had warned him. He simply knew. He always knew. He moved like smoke, like something that had learned how to disappear without disappearing. A basin sat quietly near the door, holding water gone cold from the night. He dipped the cloth with care, pressed it to his face. Not with urgency, not with tenderness, but with a quiet discipline, the kind born from years of knowing that his skin was not his own. His breath, his body, his silence, all belonged elsewhere. In the adjoining room, the nobleman slept. His limbs sprawled wide across linen sheets, mouth open, chest rising with the rhythm of wine-drunk dreams. He would remember none of them, but the concubine would. He remembered everything. The way the nobleman's fingers curled in sleep, always reaching. The way his voice shifted when he drank, louder, looser, sometimes cruel. The way he spoke at him, never to him. Laughter like a dagger with a dulled edge. It didn't cut, not anymore. It only pressed down slowly, over time. Until one day you wake up and realize the bruise has become part of you. He moved through the corridors on bare feet, lighting the small clay lamps that lined the inner walls. One by one, soft flames rose. Each flicker catches the mosaic's dark blaze, but the fire no longer felt sacred. Each wick burned like a false promise, each glow like a vow already broken. Outside, life was beginning. The city rose in layers of sound, distant and steady. A vendor's shout, the groan of wooden carts. A donkey's call, harsh and real. Metal clanged on stone as blacksmiths called. The day into being with every hammerfall. But within these walls, time stayed still. Trapped between luxury and silence, the lyre near the atrium lay untouched, the olive wood beginning to dull from disuse. Its strings sagged gently, unplucked. The master had not asked for music in days. Perhaps the melody had lost its sweetness. Perhaps the voice no longer charmed. Or perhaps, the man had begun to sense what stirred behind the concubine's eyes. Not rebellion, not hatred, something quieter. More dangerous, a stillness, a knowing. The beginning of understanding that this life, this gilded prison, would one day break. He paused by the window. Beyond the garden wall, a lemon tree quivered in the early breeze. Two sparrows darted between the leaves, feathers ruffled. From a brief struggle, one flew off. The other stayed. He watched it. Its tiny chest rose and fell. It didn't sing, it only watched the sky, and for a moment he wondered who he had become, the one who fled, or the one who remained. His eyes lingered on the tree long after the bird had disappeared from view. The branches swayed gently, whispering stories he could not yet follow. Still, the morning asked nothing of him, not his thoughts, not his anger, not even his hope, only that he remains, beautiful, obedient, unseen. But, somewhere beneath the stillness, beneath the robe that draped too heavily across his shoulder, beneath the breath that came too quietly, something had shifted, not loudly, not enough to change anything. Not yet, but enough to be noticed by the wind. which slipped through the lattice and touched his face with soft insistence. The same wind that once passed over a buried ring in a shrine's shadow. The same wind that remembered the shape of his mother's name in ash. The same wind that whispered, again and again, "You were more than this. Once and would be again." He turned away from the window. I walked quietly down the hall, past the lamps, past the silence, toward whatever came next. And as he passed the nobleman's door, he did not look in, but the air did. And in the stillness behind him, the flame of the last lamp flickered. Just once, as though it too had finally learned to doubt. The courtyard swelled with movement. Sunlight spilled like hot honey across white stone. The air shimmered with the perfume of crushed herbs and wine-soaked figs. Voices rose, clattered, and vanished. Sandals whispered over marble. Bronze jugs clinked gently in the arms of slaves. Hurrying past, their eyes cast low, their shoulders worn smooth from years of silence. Garlands of fresh laurel drooped in the heat, their green darkening at the edges. A scent of roasted meat drifted through the breeze, tangled with wood smoke and sweat. This was not joy. This was preparation. For power, for performance, for something that did not forgive mistakes. He stood in the small antechamber near the bath, body damp and glistening. Steam curled along his spine as the elder woman pressed rose oil into the hollow of his collarbone. Her hands were careful, skilled, but her eyes, they never met him. She did not need to look. She had done this 100 times. And so had he. The chiton she draped over his body was nearly weightless. It clung where the skin held warmth, slipped, like water over the shoulder, caught briefly at the hip before trailing down, pale as mist. It was beautiful and useless. He was not dressed for dignity. He was dressed to be seen. Later, when the drums signaled arrival, he was led not into the gathering, but beside it, near enough to be noticed, far enough to remain separate. A decoration, an offering, a thing to be gazed at but not addressed. He knelt once to pour the wine. The amphora was heavy and its mouth stained dark from years of feasts. As he filled the goblets, voices swelled around him, laughter, foreign tongues, the thin scrape of suspicion beneath flattery. He was not listening for meaning. He was listening for tone. The shift in breath that came before the insult, the pause before danger. And then, a gaze. Not from the master, not from the old merchant or the poet who never spoke, but from the envoy, the one they had dressed the house for. His eyes lingered, not with hunger, but with thought. Not desire, but question. And that was worse. To be noticed not as a body, but as a mind locked behind eyes that had learned to show nothing. He lowered his head, sang when told, soft notes rising and falling like the sea. Each syllable polished from years of repetition. Each phrase was shaped not by meaning, but by what the master liked to hear. The guests applauded. Wine flowed again, and when the shadows stretched long and the torches began to hiss with spent oil, he slipped away. No one stopped him. No one called his name, because he had none. Not here. Not in this place. The corridor beyond the chamber was cold. Stone met his forehead with a stillness that felt kinder than hands. He closed his eyes. Behind him, laughter rang out, thick with drunkenness and false joy. A song he had sung still, echoed faintly, twisted now by memory, stripped of intent. Something brushed against his leg, a flash of fur. He looked down. A cat, black and narrow, with gold eyes and a torn ear. It blinked, waited. He knelt slowly, reached out, and scratched behind its ear. It leaned into his touch for a breath, just long enough to know he was real, and then slipped into the night. Gone. Free. He remained still. The smell of smoke lingered. The air tasted of citrus and char. His knees pressed into the stone, and the chill seeped upward like a quiet truth. His voice was gone now. left in the room with the wine and the laughter and the men, who never saw him. But in the silence, he could almost hear it returning. Not the song they made him sing, but the voice he had before the silk, before the oil, before the name was taken from his mouth and replaced with obedience. It was faint, somewhere deep, under the skin, waiting. And though the hall was empty, and the torches nearly dead, he did not rise. He stayed where the stones met his bones, listening for something older than music, for something that might come next. And far in the distance, through the crack in the wall, a single note of wind crept in, carrying the scent of night that had not yet begun. The embers cracked like whispers in the hush of the women's quarters. It was a quiet world, trimmed in silk and smoke, where voices never rose above the rustle of fabric or the soft combing of hair. Here, time moved slowly, like the flicker of firelight across painted walls. And in that slowness, he could almost breathe. He sat cross-legged near the hearth, the worn body of his lyre nestled against his ribs, fingers plucking a lullaby barely remembered, a melody gathered long ago from a sunburned sailor who'd wept as he sang it. It was not a Roman song. It did not belong to this house. And so, it was safe. The women wove in silence, hands moving like tides across the loom. Patterns emerged, stars, flowers, winding paths, all stitched in silence. He watched not their lips, but their eyes. It was always the eyes. Eyes twinkled as they laughed politely. Eyes that dulled when no one important was near. He saw in their glances what he had never dared name in himself: containment. Beauty held captive. They were not his enemies. They were his mirrors. He had no name they used. They had no name they chose but once. One of them, the younger daughter with hair the color of damp wheat, had passed him a small gift. It was nothing. A scrap of linen, worn, fraying. An embroidered bird stitched in uneven thread, one wing lifted mid-flight. No words had been spoken. No glances held. She had simply tucked it beneath a folded robe as she passed, like slipping a pebble into a river. And yet the gesture struck him like thunder. He kept it hidden inside his pillow, its threads softened by breath, its wings smoothed by nights of dreaming. That night, while the rest of the villa stirred with servants and secrets, he sat again at the hearth. The women braided one another's hair, fingers weaving like vines, slow and deliberate. The eldest one, with a silver ring always tight around her wrist, began to hum along with his tune. It was faint, tentative. The melody did not belong to her, but the longing did. And for a moment, the room felt outside of time, as though the fire, the braids, the soft hum, all hovered together in a kind of hush untouched by ownership or fear. Then, as always, the spell broke. The lady of the house stood. Without a word, she glided from the room, her perfume trailing behind her like a memory trying to stay. The daughters followed, their sandals quiet against the tiled floor. One turned to look back, just once, and then they were gone. He stayed, not because he was allowed to, but because no one had told him to leave. The music faded. Only the coals moved now, collapsing inward, glowing beneath ash he reached into. The bundle of rags beneath his sleeping mat, drew out the scrap, hold it in the soft light. The bird was fading, its stitches loosened by time, its flight slower now, but it still flew. And that was enough. Outside, the wind stirred the fig leaves, brushing against the shutters like a hand seeking warmth. Inside, he folded the cloth again, with reverence, as if it were holy, because in this world of marble and law, of silks and silence, there were no prayers for boys like him, only scraps, only songs, only stolen glances that fluttered like birds, too small to name. And though he knew morning would come with commands, with eyes that weighed and lips that silenced, for now, he let the quiet have him, let the warmth of the hearth hold what little remained. And somewhere deep within that stillness, Something waited, not loud, not fierce, but certain. A memory not yet finished. A song not yet sung. And beyond the walls, where the fig trees whispered, the wind carried a promise. The cage is not the end. Even stones remember the sky. The cold arrived not with wind, but with silence. It slipped through the stone like a curse unspoken, threading itself beneath doorways, behind drapes, into the seams of skin. Fires barely burned. The woodpile was a memory, bark gnawed thin by desperation. Only those closest to power knew true warmth. The rest of them, they wore the cold like a second skin. He moved through the corridor with the weight of the wool cloak heavy on his shoulders, rough against his neck. It smelled of smoke and old sweat, but it kept him breathing. In a place where the marble held no heat and the air bit like metal, survival came wrapped in ugly cloth. The nobleman, his master, was dying, slowly, then quickly, then slowly again. Blood bloomed bright on linens woven in Italy, dyed with foreign beetles, stitched by hands who'd never know whose throat it would stain. And yet now here, it seemed to hold no more value than a rag dragged through mud. He sat near the bed like a shadow pretending to serve, copper ladle in hand, the broth trembling inside it with each distant echo of footsteps. The room smelled of vinegar, sickness, and fear. The physician had left hours ago, muttering prayers in Latin beneath his breath, as though heaven might be more attentive to the old tongue. Now, only the breath of the sick filled the chamber. Uneven, wet, humans died in such homes. Death was never a tragedy, it was a calculation. He saw it in the eyes of the concubine as she sat by the wall, waiting like a painting that might soon be removed. On the way, the steward passed the hall faster than usual, not pausing to look in. And in the silence of the younger daughter's chamber, too quiet, too still, they all knew what was coming. Sickness changes the order of things. It bends hierarchies, loosens chains, reassigns fates. The nobleman, once cruel in the softest of ways, a hand on a shoulder too long, a punishment too precise, now lay sweating beneath layers of velvet and fur, muttering names the servant boy did not recognize. Ithra, Dorian, the Olives. He mumbled, voice thick with fever, names that had never been spoken in this house. Ghosts not invited, but now unwilling to leave. The concubine leaned forward, her fingers wrapped tight in her shawl. She did not speak, just listened. She, too, was remembering who she had to become next. He didn't speak either, didn't move, save to adjust the blanket slipping from the man's shoulder, to set the warm bowl within reach, to keep the silence company. He looked at the frost curling across the window pane, white veins tracing like a map into a colder world. He thought of the hills beyond the city walls, of goat trails covered in snow, of small fires burning in cracked hearths, not for ceremony, but to keep children from turning blue. He had once been a child in such a home, had once worn boots stitched from sackcloth, had once believed that survival was something you did with your hands, not your silence. But here, in this great house of marble and decay, survival was quieter, slower, a performance of stillness. The nobleman groaned again, thrashing beneath dreams he could no longer hold. Don't go. Wait, they're not ready. Then silence. The bowl remained untouched. The fire was nearly out. Only a dull red glow remained in the hearth, casting soft light on the chamber's edges. Bookshelves, statues, a gilded sword rusting where no one noticed. He rose, cloak falling heavy around him, and turned toward the hall. Behind him, the nobleman breathed once, sharply. Then not again. There were no cries, no screams, just the soft hush of power dying. Outside, the wind scraped against the shutters, whispering in the old tongue of trees and time. He stepped out into the corridor, his breath pale in the air. The servants would find the body by morning. The steward would know what to say. The physician would lie, and everything would shift. But for now, he walked down the hall with his hands tucked deep in the cloak, not from cold, but from knowing. Knowing that his role was changing. Knowing that a man's death could birth the ambitions of many. And beneath all the silence, all the ritual, there was one truth that burned brighter than any hearth. The cold had not taken him. The cold had made him sharp. And sharp things survive. Down the hallway, a torch sputtered. The flame blinked once, twice, then steadied. And in that flicker, something moved. Not a figure, not a whisper, but a future, shifting, waiting, breathing. The door behind him stayed open, and the cold poured in. The city rang like a bell. From the highest marble steps of the Acropolis to the crowded dust of the Agora, Athens pulsed with celebration, loud, golden, living. Smoke from 100 fires rose into the summer sky, where it twisted with ribbons and prayers and laughter. The day belonged to gods and mortals alike. It was a festival, a sacred day. A day when even the poor could wear color, and the walls between castes thinned like fog in sunlight. He walked alone through it all, no hand gripping his arm, no eyes tracking his every breath. For the first time in many seasons, he walked like he belonged. The master had allowed it. No reason given, just a quiet instruction. At dawn, a coin pouch passed with a strange look, somewhere between warning and release. Before sunset, the steward had muttered, but that was all. And now, here he was swallowed by a city alive with noise. The sunlight startled him. It did not stab, it warmed, soft across the cheek, golden on the stones. He had forgotten how heat could feel like kindness. The wind carried scents that made his stomach ache and his soul rise. Roasted barley cracked over open flames, fig cakes, wrapped in vine leaves and pressed with honey. Sea salt clinging to warm air like memory. Children ran barefoot with paint smeared across their faces, chasing each other through petals and ash. Musicians struck lyres near temple gates, their strings calling gods who no longer answered. Dancers, barefoot and wild, spun beside pillars wrapped in ribbons, blue for the sky, red for the blood, white for the silence between them. He moved slowly, as though time would bend for him today. His cloak was plain, his sandals worn, but no one stopped him. No one questioned the boy who watched too closely. He watched everything. A beggar knelt before a statue of Athena, eyes closed, hands trembling. Nearby, a woman pressed a bundle of herbs to a priest's robe, whispering the name of a child who no longer woke. A poet shouted verse to the clouds, words too fast and broken to follow. But the passion cut through. It was not for applause. It was survival. Then, through a narrow stone passage where the crowd thinned, he saw it, a crooked table propped against a wall. The old man behind it looked carved from wood himself, face lined like dry bark, fingers stained with paint. Before him were figurines, crude but beautiful. Clay shaped into gods, birds, children, beasts, not polished, not perfect, but alive. One piece held his gaze. A small boy, crouched low, a dove on his shoulder. The wings were not quite even, the face smudged. But something in the gesture, the tilt of the head, the curl of the fingers, stirred a warmth he hadn't known in years. He reached out, touched it gently, then pulled back. The old man said nothing. Only watched. He did not buy it. Couldn't. But the touch was enough. Because in that alley, beneath the shouting of priests and the pounding of drums, something opened inside him. Something older than the city, deeper than his servitude. A name came to him. Not the one they called him in the house. Not boy. Not you. But a name whispered once by his mother, years ago. Wrapped in a dialect the walls of Athens had never heard. It tasted like soil and rain. Like a lullaby spoken beside a hearth long gone cold. He walked back slowly as the sun lowered itself toward the hills. By the time he reached the house, the light had thinned. The shadows had grown longer, the silence heavier. The gates opened for him without a word. Inside, everything looked the same, but it felt different, as though the house had swallowed something in his absence and was now digesting it. The master said nothing when he passed, just nodded once and returned to his scrolls, as if words might undo whatever had been allowed today. That night, after the lamps had been dimmed and footsteps ceased to echo in the halls, he lay in the dark with only the sound of his own breath. For company, he took out his wax tablet dot, and with the edge of his fingernail, he drew it. Slowly, carefully dot the small boy. The dove. The tilt of the head. He carved it from memory, not to keep, but to hold something truer than stone. When he was done, he slid the tablet beneath his bedding, not hidden out of fear, but out of reverence. Some things could not be owned, but they could be remembered. Outside, the wind shifted. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, a torch hissed as it burned too low, and he lay still, whispering the name he now remembered. Once, twice, until it felt real again. Not as hoped, but it's true. And somewhere in the distance, a dove stirred. The rain would not stop it. Fell in thin, endless threads, soft and cold as spider silk, sliding down rooftops and across marble walls like the fingers of a god in mourning. The world outside had lost its shape. No shadows, no edge to the sky, only gray upon gray. Water upon water, sorrow without end. Inside the sleeping room, the sound became a rhythm. A slow, relentless dripping from the cracked roof onto the stone basin below. A single note repeated, again and again, as if time itself had forgotten how to move forward. They whispered someone had broken an oath, a servant perhaps, or a nobleman's careless lie, or a slave's hidden truth. And the gods, distant, watchful, old, had answered with rain. He sat by the doorway, knees drawn up, cloak draped over thin shoulders damp from leaking wind. Water curled down the stone steps like veins carrying dust into the earth. The cold reached his bones, but he didn't shiver. He only watched, silent, unmoving. A slave woman passed by, her hands red from scrubbing the floors. Without a word, she handed him a dry cloth. Their eyes met for half a second, then passed on like strangers in a dream. Nothing needed to be said. Silence in a house like this was a kind of mercy. The nobleman had grown impatient with the weather. Rain to him was not a blessing, it was boredom. He prowled the halls like a caged beast, irritated by creased linens and cooling wine. No jest was good enough. No song is sweet enough. No servant fast enough. The concubine endured. Him with the calm of someone who had long since buried her hopes beneath perfume and powder. Her voice never rose, her hands never shook. She bowed at his cruelty as one might bow to thunder, not with respect, but with resignation. Then, one evening, the air cracked with thunder, and lightning chased the wind through the olive groves. Boy spilled a drop of wine. That was all. The master turned, not with fury, not with wrath, with boredom. As if hitting him was just another distraction, another small act to kill the quiet. The back of the hand came first. Then the ring, the flash of gold against his cheek felt more like ice than fire. Sharp, cold, fast. The pain came a breath. Later, dull, familiar, and then the taste of copper on his tongue. He did not cry. He did not speak. He turned and walked, not away, not in retreat, but in quiet refusal to the far room where the fire was always low, and the stone always warm. There, he knelt before a clay lamp. Its flame danced weakly, unsure of itself in the wind. Shadows clung to the corners like old ghosts. He whispered, not loudly, not to the gods of thunder or war, who never listened, not to those who lived on mountaintops and demanded blood in return for rain. He prayed to the others, the forgotten ones, the god of hollow hearths and silent tears, the spirit who watched olive roots in winter, the mother of childless mothers. He did not ask for vengeance. He did not ask for freedom. only for softness. Somewhere, someday, a corner of the world where the air was gentle, where no hand struck without reason, where silence meant peace and not fear. Outside, the rain thickened. It carved rivers across the courtyard, washed footprints into the earth, carried petals from the garden to the gutter. Inside, the lamp flickered. He watched it burn until his eyelids grew heavy. And for the first time in days, he closed them without dread. He did not dream of escape. He dreamed of stillness, of a hand that did not hurt, of a voice that did not command, of a sky that held no storm. And somewhere in the dark, beneath the rain and the stone, a God too small to be remembered heard him. He came quietly, not like a storm, not like a threat, but like mist before morning. A boy of narrow frame, northern skin still touched with the salt of the sea wind, eyes wide with something between fear and wonder. His steps echoed softly on the stone as he was led through the long halls, past tapestries he could not name, toward a fate he did not understand. The household watched. Some from behind veils, others from open doorways. Slaves whispered beneath their breath, not out of cruelty, but caution. In houses like these, a new face always meant something, a replacement, a rival, or worse. A mirror held too close to what had already been broken. The concubine was summoned, told to teach, to shape the new boy in the same mold that once carved him. How to stand, how to pour without spilling, how to lower his gaze, but not too far, how to sing with warmth, but without longing, how to serve a man and disappear the moment he finishes. The older boy obeyed, not because he wished to, but because he understood that some kindness must be preserved, even in cages. And when he looked at the new boy's posture, uncertain and eager, he saw the shadow of himself, the same clumsy movements, the same trembling hands. The first night, the boy cried, not loud, just a soft shaking breath muffled beneath a rough blanket. He did not know how to hide it yet. His grief was still too new, too raw. The concubine did not scold him. He simply placed a damp cloth beside his bed, said nothing, turned away. Their friendship was not born in fire or laughter. It bloomed in silence, like moss in a shaded corner. Quiet, slow, cautious. In stolen hours, they spoke in half phrases. Not of escape, not of rebellion. Those words were too dangerous. They spoke of home, of what bread tasted like when baked by mothers, of the shape of trees near their childhood wells. Sometimes, they sat together beneath the fig tree in the garden, a place mostly ignored, overgrown with vines and memories. There, the world softened. One evening, beneath the pale curve of a crescent moon, the new boy asked the question that had lived in his throat for days. Do you think, will we ever be free? The concubine was silent. He could not lie. Not to this boy, not to the version of himself he once was. So instead, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, gently, without pressure. A gesture born not of hope, but of understanding. And in that moment, it was enough. That night, sleep came lightly, like a veil drawn over aching limbs. And in his dream, the older boy found himself beside a river, wide, silver, quiet. No name was called, no voice ordered him to return. He walked barefoot into the reeds, and the water, cold, clean, holy, welcomed him like an old friend. No chains, no titles, no silence filled with fear, just the hush of wind and the freedom of not being watched. He woke before dawn. The fig tree swayed in the wind outside. Somewhere a door creaked. Somewhere else, a servant began to sweep. But in the stillness between those sounds, something lingered, not hope, not quite. Something smaller, softer. Like the memory of a river, or a name once whispered, now nearly forgotten. Autumn came like a slow breath drawn between teeth. The heat thinned, the markets emptied. Leaves at the edge of the city walls curled brown and brittle, their green giving way without protest. Smoke from the kilns hung low, mixing with the smell of iron, damp wool, and things turning toward decay. The great house felt it too, not with fear, with adjustment. Fewer lanterns, thicker cloaks, a quiet taking stock of what would last, the cold and what would not. He was sent to the herb court at first light. Clay trays lay spread beneath stretched linen, each lined with stems and petals in careful rows. Thyme stripped down to woody sprigs, hyssop bundled and hung. Rose petals dried to paper, their red darkening like old wounds. His fingers reddened as he worked, nails stained green, skin rough with resin. The air there was sharp and sweet, a kind of medicine he almost trusted. The steward watched. Not openly, not rudely, just long enough. Long enough to remind him that hands were noted, those tasks were judged. In houses like this, power rarely spoke its name. It lived where a man stood whom he addressed, whom he touched when passing. A glance could change a winter. A hand on a shoulder could shift the future. He kept working. Bundled, tied, laid flat. The thread he used was coarse, spun for storage work, not ceremony. It stuck to his skin. Once, it snagged and snapped. The steward saw, said nothing. Walking on, that silence held more weight than any rebuke. By mid-morning, the kitchen steamed with barley mash and stewed greens. Smoke curled against the rafters. That was when the pigeon came. It landed on the sill above the hearthstones, wet from mist, head tilted, watching. No wax, no seal, no tiny scroll tucked to its leg. Only a loop of thread, thin, pale, knotted. Twice and frayed, wrapped loose around the scaled skin above its claw. It pecked once at crumbs, blinked at him, then launched back into the yard and vanished over the tiled roof. He stood there longer than he meant to, staring at the empty ledge. He did not envy its wings. Flight meant hunger, storms, hawks. No. What caught him was something smaller, that a creature could arrive, carry nothing required, and still go. No expectation, no summons, no music was demanded. No one is waiting to recall it. He returned to his work, but the thread would not leave his mind. The day darkened faster than it should have. Clouds rolled in from the north, the cold wind. That smelled of wet iron and sheep. Somewhere beyond the city, men quarreled. Men always did when food thinned and borders mattered again. Before dusk, a rider arrived drenched and shivering. Mud up to the girth. The gate guards did not announce him with a ceremony. He pushed through, handed a sealed scroll, and left as if the ground burned. The news moved through the villa like smoke. The nobleman's cousin was dead. Cut down in a border clash over pasturage, goats, insult. The story shifted with each whisper. What did not change was the result. A body never coming home. A name black ribboned in the family hall. The ritual began at once. Bright fabrics removed. Laurel stripped from pillars. Lamps extinguished in outer rooms. No laughter at table. Wine poured but not toasted. Meat carved but eaten in near silence. The household folded itself into mourning the way winter folds. Leaves into soil. He was told to sing. Not the light drinking pieces. Not love verse. Laments. He tuned the lyre with cold fingers. Strings tight from dry air. Sat near the inner hearth, where shadows pooled thick against painted walls. The family gathered, cloaks dark, faces drawn long by theater and truth in equal measure. Servants lined the edges. Even the steward stood back from the fire. He began low, a drone beneath breath, the hum of earth when rain approaches. Then the melody rose, thin at first, gaining warmth as the second verse opened. He did not sing of the cousin. He sang of crossing water, of names spoken over stones, of men who leave before harvest and return in spring as stories. He sang in the city tongue, then slipped, just once, a line of his mother's dialect beneath the refrain, soft enough that only those closest might hear, too strange to parse, too clean to stop. His throat burned by the fourth verse. By the final chord, something in the room had shifted. Grief, yes, but more. Recognition, maybe, of the smallness of rank against loss. He lifted his gaze and saw the steward's eyes wet. Not wide, not broken, just wet. The tears did not fall. They clung. He did not think the man wept for the dead. Perhaps for the ledger of his own life, all the things done, all the silences held. When the gathering ended, the household moved like ghosts. Footsteps are soft. Speech thinner than candle. Smoke. He returned the lyre to its stand and carried a taper through the hall, relighting room by room where mourning allowed. The tiles beneath him were cold. He walked barefoot, skin gripping stone, each step a small claim that he still felt. His shadow stretched long ahead of him, thrown huge across painted hunts and gods who never bent to mortal sorrow. Tall, gaunt, older than the body that cast it. For a moment he paused and watched that shape move before him, a man he had not yet become. Already walking dot at his bed, he sat and warmed his hands over the taper. The wax pooled, thin. Outside, leaves scraped the wall like dry fingers. Somewhere near the kitchen, the new boy coughed in his sleep. He reached beneath his bedding, found the wax tablet where he had carved the pigeon from festival day, the boy. With the dove from the market, the stitched bird on the linen scrap from the women's quarters, all the small wings he had not been allowed to keep. With a fingernail he added one more line, a loop of thread around a slender leg. He closed the cover and lay back, cloak pulled to his chin, autumn pressed against the shutters. The house held its breath. In the dark, he whispered his first name. Once, then again, tasting the syllables like spice long hidden in a jar. Beyond the courtyard, high in the rafters, something feathered shifted and settled. And in the morning, when frost would silver the herb trays, decisions would begin to move. Slow as cold, certain as night thought it happened in spring. The nobleman died as the frost left the soil, quietly, without a gasp or groan. His chest simply stopped its rise. His lips ceased their trembling breath. One moment he was dreaming. The next, he was gone. No storm, no blood, no warning, just stillness. Sudden and complete. The house did not scream. It inhaled. Doors stopped creaking. Footsteps softened. Even the wind outside the shutters seemed to walk gently that morning. Death had entered, not with fury, but with a finger to the lips. The concubine was not summoned first. Servants were. Sent down corridors with whispers, wet-eyed and urgent. But he already knew, long before the words. Something in the silence had changed, not in volume, but in shape. The way walls echo when no one is listening. The way shadows move when no one is watching. He stood alone in the gallery near the inner courtyard, looking at the petals falling from the almond trees. They fell slowly, without wind, like snow in a dream. And he knew, the man who once summoned him with a cough or a cough disguised as a command would not summon anyone again. It was custom, old and strange, that the noble's body be washed by someone trusted. Not family, not kin, but someone whose hands had known the body in life. It was a ritual of remembrance, not duty, a practice that blurred intimacy and obligation. Somehow they chose him. He did not ask why. He prepared the chamber himself. A basin of warm water, scented faintly with crushed lavender and crushed rosemary. Cloths folded and laid by the brazier. He removed the rings, the robe, the thin sash. Around the waist, he placed each item gently on folded linen. Then slowly he began. There were no tears. He was past tears. He was somewhere else now, somewhere between memory and muscle, where the hands know what to do long before the mind does. The skin was softer than he remembered, paler, bruised at the edges. The body was not monstrous. It was simply a body, wrinkled where it had once been smooth, sagged where it had once been strong. He cleaned the chest, the arms, the thin places behind the knees. The small scar beneath the ribs, the one no one ever mentioned. He clipped the fingernails, combed the thinning hair with the old ivory comb, washed behind the ears. Then, when it was done, when the clothes were rinsed and the robes replaced and the candles trimmed to a soft glow, he leaned close and whispered, not to the man, but to himself. He had once been in this room. The boy who stood by that bed, eager for a glance. The voice that once answered even the unspoken. The soul is tied to that gaze, that hand, that power. I release you, he said, though no one would hear. Morning began that same night. Black garments were fetched from cedar chests. Banners turned inward. Bells tolled low, not for all the city to hear, but for those within these walls, a kind of sorrow that belonged to quiet spaces. Food was prepared in silence. The steward now walked with 2 guards beside him. Names were whispered, futures recalculated. Outside, the world bloomed. Grass thickened. Bees returned to the hives. Rain came in bursts, warm and heavy, like the sky was weeping in intervals. But inside, the house waited, for letters, for claimants, for the next command to follow. He did not wait. Each morning, before others awoke, he slipped into the garden. There, under the olive trees, he knelt in the soil and pulled weeds. Dirt pressed beneath his fingernails, cold and alive. He whispered stories to the roots, old ones, childhood ones, ones he had not told aloud since the day he was first brought through those iron gates. He spoke to the trees like they would. Remember him. In his tunic pouch, he kept a ring. It was not stolen. It was not hidden. It was kept. A blue stone, worn at the edge. Once worn by a man who ruled a house, then a room, then nothing at all. He touched it now and then. Not with greed, but with something softer, proof that he had once been chosen, even if not free. Some called him lucky, to survive, to remain. But survival is not a clean word. It leaves a taste. It asks questions no one wants to answer aloud that he did not feel. Triumphant, he felt rooted. The way a stone settles deeper each season into the earth. The way old seeds sometimes surprise the ground and bloom after years of waiting. One morning, as the sky turned silver, he heard a new voice in the corridor, young, sharp with authority. The heir, perhaps, or someone sent to take the house apart and divide it like bread among the hungry. He looked up from the soil. An olive blossom had fallen into his palm. So fragile, so pale, he did not crush it. He let it rest there. Let the wind take it, because in that small moment, surrounded by death, memory, and green things pushing through the dirt, he felt something begin again, not loudly, not fully, but real. And soon, there would be choices, new shadows, new games, of silence and power. But for now, there was only breath, and the scent of spring in the trees.